Greg Laurie here with my friend Joel Rosenberg, New York Times best-selling author. Over 5 million copies of his books are in print. He also has a program on the Trinity Broadcasting Network called The Rosenberg Report. Also has a news site called All Israel News. And he has the Joshua Fund. So Joel, welcome. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Tell me what the Joshua Fund is all about in particular.
So 18 years ago, my wife Lynn and I founded the Joshua Fund to educate and mobilize Christians, mostly evangelicals, to bless Israel and her neighbors, according to the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And the idea was, all right, so what are the different biblical ways to bless? Well, certainly we want to educate the church worldwide. Why does God love Israel and her neighbors? What is God's prophetic plan for Israel and her neighbors? Why does the Bible call Israel the apple of God's eye and so forth? So a lot of Christians don't know that. So part of it is educational. Then it's humanitarian relief. How do we enable the local believers in Israel and in the Arab world to provide food and clothing and whatever to people in need, people going through war and terror, people who are just poverty-stricken, widows and orphans. And then strengthening the local believers, investing financially, prayerfully, training, equipping, so forth, to the Israeli church and to the Palestinian church and to 5 neighboring Arab countries, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. And so we get to know the local believers in these countries and then prayerfully assess, who can we help? Lord, what are you telling us to do? So
on October 7th, in Israel, a horrific terrorist attack happened. Hamas came by air, by land, by sea, and attacked and brutally murdered Israeli citizens, young and old. Atrocities happened that we've not heard of since, the Holocaust. And the whole world was shocked to hear this, and I believe around 1,200 Israelis died. But that number has even grown some since then because many soldiers have died in
Gaza and Lebanon as we fight.
And how many hostages were taken?
255. There's 101 still left in Gaza. As you and I discussed that, about half are believed to be alive, but maybe the other half are already dead, but we certainly want their bodies back.
If such a thing happened in America, if we were to compare it, taking the population of Israel and the United States, it would be like you get up in the morning and go to your favorite news site or open up a newspaper, if people actually subscribe to those still, and read 40,000 Americans killed in terrorist attack. Now, our reaction would be swift, as it was after 9/11.
Yeah, I mean, just think about that. 40,000 is close to 15 times the number of Americans that were killed on 9/11. Think of how that changed America forever.
It did.
And led us into 2 Middle Eastern wars. Whether people agree with those wars or not, just think that's what got set into motion for years. The war in Afghanistan lasted for 20 years.
Yes.
But this would be an attack 15 times more deadly.
Right.
That's what Israelis are really.
But yet you would think there would be an outpouring of public sympathy toward the nation Israel and toward Jewish people in general. Yet shockingly, there's been a rise of anti-Semitism. It's risen dramatically in Germany, of all places. It's on our college campuses or Ivy League universities. Young students holding signs with slogans like, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." I even saw one sign that said, "Gas the Jews." I couldn't believe such a thing, especially in light of how many Jewish lives were lost in the Holocaust. And that seems like ancient history, but it really isn't. It isn't that long ago.
Not to Jews, not to Israelis,
Not to a Jew.
Yeah.
And so how has that affected maybe the psyche or the way that Jews in Israel think today? And why is this an important event for us all to look at?
Well, there's several ways to think about it. So if you think of the emotional impact, and I appreciate you opening with that comparison to what the magnitude would be for Americans, because we were horrified by 3,000 Americans being killed on 9/11, or nearly 3,000. So if it was 40,000, the shock, the anger, the pain would be so deep and everyone would go to battle stations. You'd know we were going to go to war for, against whoever.
Well, it happened on Pearl Harbor too. A similar,
Absolutely.
that's got America into a world war.
A war we specifically were trying to stay out of.
True.
I mean, Europe had almost been completely taken over. Winston Churchill was pleading with the Americans, come here and help us, because if you lose Europe, you're going to lose access to the Atlantic Ocean. The Nazis are going to take over, and it wasn't until we got attacked by the Japanese in Pearl Harbor. So that's the level of shock, awe, grief, anger, pain, depression that Israelis are in. We're a small country. The United States is a continental country. You have a third of a billion people. We have 10 million people.
Many Israelis might have known some of those people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And everybody began to come to know the 255 hostages because we put them on television, their families, interviews, posters all over, pray for them, And so then you take the contrast to October 6th, the day before 2023. Israelis felt so secure, so relaxed. We had just made peace with 4 Arab countries through the Abraham Accords. We were about to make peace with the Saudis, which would have transformed the region forever. Once the Saudis make peace with Israel, then the Indonesians are going to make peace with Israel. That's the largest Muslim country in the world. And it's going to just break open the floodgates of more and more peace treaties. So we all went to bed on Friday night, October 6th, 2023, feeling peaceful, relaxed, safe, and as though the world was beginning to say, you know what, and not just the world, but the region, you know what, Israel is here to stay. We love Israel.
Yeah.
We don't agree with them on everything, but that's okay. That's because that's how our Arab neighbors were treating us. And then came the morning of October 7th. It was a Saturday morning. It was not only a Shabbat, therefore everybody sort of sleeping in and taking it quiet, unless you're going to synagogue or to church, but also it was a Jewish holiday, Simchat Torah, the joy of receiving the Torah, the law of God on Mount Sinai from Moses. So this was, we didn't see it coming, the prime minister didn't see it coming, the intelligence, the military, nobody saw it coming. We weren't prepared for it at all.
But why? I mean, everyone knows about the legendary exploits of Mossad and Israeli intelligence. And most recently, we heard about these pagers that were weaponized to deal with Hezbollah, people connected with Hezbollah terrorism. And yet, missing something of this magnitude. How did that happen?
Nobody knows.
Wow.
It's a catastrophic failure. But the general view, I mean, there will be investigations, but the investigations, the formal government commissions of inquiry have been sort of put on hold until we win, right? We can't have an internal fight with ourselves over whose fault was this. But there's deep, deep anger and resentment because this wasn't just as bad as the invasion on Yom Kippur of 1973 when Egypt and Syria attacked. That was bad, and this was the exact 50th anniversary of that.
Yes.
But that at least was military to military.
Yeah.
So that's horrible. This is grandmothers and grandfathers and children and babies asleep in their bed on a Saturday morning, and suddenly Hamas comes and cuts off their heads, burns them alive in their homes, shoots children in front of their parents, parents in front of their children, beheads people, put a baby in an oven to burn alive.
And people want to bury that narrative.
Raping men and women.
I saw a video, someone had a video that has been shown in select places that were actually video that was taken by these terrorist groups because they were filming it. And I watched it for 3 minutes and couldn't watch anymore. But it was like, how could someone do this to someone else? But I think
this was a demon-possessed invasion.
I agree.
There's no other way that you could possibly fathom this. I took a group of evangelicals to meet in several different places to watch. There's a 47-minute version of those film clips, video clips. Again, these are the Nazis tried to cover up their crimes, but Hamas used GoPro to film them and to release this on some of it. They were live streaming. Some of it they would take the victim's phone of the person they just murdered or at least wounded, and then filmed the rest of the murder, so that their family and friends on their Facebook Live page would see the murder of their grandmother
That's
or
unthinkable.
whomever. It was unthinkable, and made worse because of how peaceful and relaxed we felt, how close we were to peace with the Saudis.
What was their motivation? Like, what would, I mean, I think demonic is really an accurate assessment because it's inexplicable. I mean, surely they knew Israel would retaliate and respond. What was the thinking of not only killing all these innocent people, but then in such atrocious ways, then filming it and broadcasting it? What do you think Hamas, which is a proxy organization of Iran, along with Hezbollah? So what was Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, etc., thinking? Like, we will accomplish this if we bring out this terrorist attack.
So they had several objectives. The first objective was to catch Israel unaware and to humiliate and obviously kill as many people as possible. That's the first thing. The second thing was by showing it live stream and in other social media ways, Hamas was taking a page out of the ISIS playbook, which was to what you're trying to do is alert, educate, and mobilize and inflame any other demonically possessed radical Islamist jihadists in the region to go, amen, look what they're doing to the Jews, I'm in also, and to set into motion, again, not most Muslims, but you only need a subset to go, I'm in. So this is what they wanted. Then what's interesting, and I will say in God's mercy, right, this is an Iranian plot, but somehow it got disconnected because Hezbollah did not understand that Hamas was moving on the 7th. Hezbollah, the terror proxy force, which is much larger, much more dangerous in Lebanon, again, all this funded, fueled, armed, trained, and directed by Iran, but they do have independent leadership in the sense that they get their money and their funds and their arms and everything and directions from Iran's regime, but obviously they can make tactical decisions of their own. Somehow, the leadership of Hamas decided to move without being in synchronization with the others. Hezbollah had put out a video 10 years ago, 11 now, but 10 years ago as of last year, showing how they were going to invade northern Israel and take over the entire Galilee. And that's what Israel was prepared for and was watching.
Wow.
They did not have their eye on Hamas, which they considered a nuisance and not a strategic threat. But if they had moved simultaneously, I just heard an Israeli intelligence expert say the other day, both forces probably could have met and shook hands in Tel Aviv. We were so unprepared. The reason we were unprepared in the north, like Joel, you just said that Israel was prepared for and watching Hezbollah. Yes, but we didn't see any preparations for imminent invasion. So there weren't mobilized tanks and combat battalions on that border. Everything felt quiet in every direction. This was part of a strategic deception campaign by Hamas. But somehow the communication between Hamas and Hezbollah didn't happen. Hezbollah was not ready. And the reason probably is pride. Probably Hamas wanted to, the best assessment we can give at this point was that Hamas wanted to make the first blow, and then they figured Hezbollah and Iran would all come in at the same time. Hezbollah did start firing missiles, but did not invade. But and that's just God's mercy, because otherwise, Israel there were no roads that were blocked by tanks. It took days and days for Israel to mobilize, and then you had to mobilize 350,000 teachers, bankers, bakers, firemen, whatever. Leave your work, come to your base, get suited up, and get ready to go invade Gaza. So the grief, Lynn and I were going through this. We live in Jerusalem. 8 rounds of missiles fired at Jerusalem just on that Saturday. We were in our bomb shelter most of the day.
So you've seen these missiles fired over you. You've seen the Iron Dome,
intercept them, yeah. Including in April, our apartment in Jerusalem faces east. So normally we don't see missiles actually in the sky because our apartment faces east. The other side of the apartment faces southwest. And so the missiles are coming when they come, and which is not that often to Jerusalem. But when they come, the sirens go off and you go to your bomb shelter. I don't, because I run a news agency, so I go outside to film. But my wife is always like, "What are you doing? Why are you?" Well, this is what I do. But anyway, the rockets and missiles come from the southwest, from Gaza. But in this case, in April, then there were 321 missiles coming from Iran. First time the Iranian regime has ever directly fired at us since the creation of the State of Israel. And then just recently, they fired almost 200 additional ballistic missiles. And so to see them streaking through the air, and then to watch the interceptions over your own home, and it's not just a good fireworks show. It's like these people are trying to kill you.
Yeah, and you could die.
And you could die, and as the interceptions happen, your apartment, your life, your whole body is shaking. You can feel it, and you're thinking, thank God that Israel didn't listen to the critics of President Ronald Reagan from the 80s when Reagan said, "Look, we can't just build nuclear weapons and missiles to take out the Soviets if they attack us. That's immoral. We need a way to defend ourselves and shoot those down." And people mocked him and said, "This is what are you watching Star Wars too often? You can't shoot a missile with a missile or use a laser to shoot." That's exactly what Israel's doing, including with lasers now. And so thank God, because yes, almost 2,000 Israelis have been killed over the course of this past year. But the numbers would be in the tens and tens of thousands if we didn't have missile interceptors.
So, Joel, a twofold question. Why this hatred for the Jewish people? And how does this fit into a prophetic puzzle?
Sure.
Because you said Iran directly fired missiles at Israel. Yeah. That has never happened before. So we look at Ezekiel 37, and after Israel has been gathered from the four corners of the earth back in her homeland, which has happened, and she is now a nation and has been since May 14th, 1948. We read about Magog, which many believe is Russia, attacking Israel, and one of her allies is Persia, which was the name of Iran until 1935?
Right.
So here we have an enemy of Israel, predicted hundreds of years before it happened, marching
2,500 years ago, actually.
2,500 years earlier, attacking it. So I'm not saying that's a fulfillment of that prophecy, but it's a step in that direction, or is it? Tell us.
Okay, so let's break this into two pieces, as you said. First is why. Where's this anti-Semitism, anti-Israel coming from? I think the simplest way to explain it, Greg, is from John 10:10, which is not a verse that people tend to go to understand anti-Semitism, but they should. Why? Because Jesus describes Satan and he describes himself. Jesus describes Satan as the thief who comes to rob, kill, and destroy.
Right.
And Jesus says, by contrast, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly.
Yes.
Okay. So we learn several things out of that verse. We learn that Jesus and Satan are polar opposites. Now, they're not equals, but they are opposites.
True.
So everything that God wants, Satan is against. All right? So then when you take that principle of John 10:10 and you apply it to all that we know about God's love and heart and plan for Israel, it begins to make sense. So God said to the Jewish people, I love you and I want to bless you. So Satan is an opposite. So he says, I hate you and I want to curse you. God says, I'm going to give you, as the Jewish people, a land. Satan says, fine, I'm going to take it away. God says, I'm going to make Jerusalem holy to my name, and a city of peace. And Satan says, fine, I'm going to desecrate it and make it a city of bloodshed. God says, I'm going to make the Temple Mount holy to my name. And Satan says, I'm going to desecrate it. Wow. So everything that God wants, Satan is against, because Satan is not he's not a creator, and he's not a creative being. All he can do is look at God's plan and then try to twist it and try to ruin it.
Right.
So people ask, why have people all throughout history wanted to destroy the Jews? They don't want to just dismiss them or hate them. They want to annihilate them, right? Haman in the book of Esther, right? He's disrespected, in his view, by one Jew, and he decides to issue an edict to kill, and to use the word as annihilate is what he says in this letter, to kill every Jew in the entire Persian Empire from Ethiopia to India. That's just, talk about a little bit overreaction. Right? And so we see that. We see that in Hitler. We see it in Pharaoh, of course, back in the book of Exodus.
It's irrational, but it's demonic.
It's irrational, but it fits the plan. Once you understand that Satan is against everything that Jesus is for, then you understand Jesus is to bless us, and Satan is trying to curse us and eradicate us. And the prophet Isaiah, for example, even says, if you could eradicate and annihilate all the Jews, then you would break God's promise.
Yeah.
That's what Satan's trying to do.
Yeah.
So we're seeing it now. Hamas, in its charter, 1988, says we're going to wipe out all the Jews and destroy Israel. The Iranian regime says we're going to annihilate all the Jews. That's why they're trying to build nuclear weapons. Yeah. And Hezbollah has the same view. So that's the world that we live in. It's not surprising then, unfortunately, that when you look at Bible prophecy, you would have to expect an explosion, a surge of anti-Jewish hatred, Jew hatred accelerating as we get closer to the return of Christ, because in Revelation 12, God says Satan is going to be enraged. He's going to be inflamed with rage against Israel and against the Jewish people and against God's children through the church. So that's just one example. But you see that Israel is isolated and abandoned by every country in the world. We see that in the book of Joel, my favorite book. We see it in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Yes. Then we get to places like, Zechariah and Jeremiah and Isaiah and Revelation, in which every country is going to attack Israel. Yeah. So we're not to every nation attacking Israel yet. And we're not even quite yet at every nation abandoning Israel, although Israel feels more abandoned today than ever before. The British have cut off arms to us. The French have cut off arms to us. Depending on the day, the White House has cut off arms to resupply Israel in the fight of our lives.
Yes.
So this is the trajectory. That's the hatred. That's your first question.
Yes.
Your second question is Bible prophecy, which I'm beginning to put into context. Look, I can't tell you right now that we are in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Things could change, but we don't have enough data to say that. So I feel like the better way is to be conservative and not try to speculate.
Yes.
That's the first thing. The second thing is, I do believe we are in Matthew 24. We're seeing, this is one more war, rumor of war,
yes.
A kingdom against kingdom, nation against nation. We are seeing a birth pang. Birth pangs are contraction, release, contraction, release. October 6th, we were in a release. Israelis felt calm, relaxed. October 7th, we started the longest contraction in the modern history of Israel. We're in the longest war, the deadliest war, the most painful war that we've been in since 48.
Wow.
But as you and I record this, we may be heading into the most dangerous period since that war began on October 7th, because as you and I sit and record this, Iran has just fired its second round of hundreds of ballistic missiles, and Israel is actively considering launching a massive military attack to take out the Iranian leadership, the way they took out the Hamas leadership and the Hezbollah leadership, to take out the Iranian nuclear facilities as they try to build a bomb, and possibly Iran's oil refining facilities as well. If we do that, as an Israeli citizen I say this, then two options are possible. One is we could deliver a knockout decapitation strike and it could all get quiet.
Yeah.
Or this could set into motion an apocalyptic war of hundreds and thousands of missiles raining down on Israel and American bases and troops and allies throughout the Middle East, and the setting into motion, the electrifying, the turning the key towards hundreds of terror sleeper cells in the United States and all over Europe and all around the world to attack Americans, Christians, Jews. We don't know what's coming, but we know that the Iranian regime has set all of this into motion, driven by Satan, and they have to be stopped. So I understand that people say, we're Christians, we should want peace. Yes, we should. But Ecclesiastes 3 tells us there is a time for peace and there's a time for war. Yeah. Not because we seek war, but you can't just surrender to the enemy who's trying to annihilate you.
That's right. And Iran, it's hard to understand. I mean, in the Trump administration with the Abraham Accords, we cut off oxygen to Iran in many ways. And then in the Obama-Biden administration, there was a change in strategy, and suddenly we're giving them funds. And then that continues on in the Biden-Harris administration. And so in many ways, we could say that American dollars have contributed toward these terrorism acts that have happened. This makes no sense to me when Iran is an avowed enemy not only of Israel, but of America.
Yeah.
Don't they refer to Israel as a little Satan and America as the great Satan?
Yes.
So in effect, is not the enemy of Israel also the enemy of the United States? Why would we want to fund an enemy?
Well, trying to get into the minds of President Barack Obama and then Vice President Joe Biden when they made the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, which of course, Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, was strongly against. Yeah. I was at his speech to a joint session of Congress when he laid out the case. Look, this is a bad idea. But Obama and Biden wanted to do it, and their theory was that the Iranian regime has been isolated for a long time. What they really want is to get back on the on-ramp to the highway of international community and they be part of the family of nations. And so they need an on-ramp. And if we give them $150 billion in cash, that'll help incentivize them to just give up their war aims against Israel and the United States. The Iranians, the Iranian regime, they're not idiots. They're evil, but they're not idiots. Yeah. If you want to give them $150 billion and negotiate a deal that they didn't even have to literally sign, then they'll take it. But they use that money to then fund all of their terror proxies, and now we're in the situation we're in. President Trump came into office saying he was going to rip up that deal. He didn't for the first year because Arab leaders were saying, that seems like a bad idea. That's just going to inflame the Iranians. Yeah. But after Netanyahu sent in the Israeli secret services known as the Mossad and stole the Iranian nuclear archive, all their files, right from a warehouse in Tehran under their noses, and then published it to the world and showed, look, they've been working on building nuclear weapons. They're lying when they say they don't want that. A week later, Trump ripped up the deal and then applied what he called a maximum pressure campaign, massive economic sanctions that really did hurt Iran. It was the first time the Iranian regime has ever sort of paid a consequence. The American government and the Israeli government have never directly entered a war with Iran. Occasional pinpricks here and taking out a top Iranian terror commander or nuclear scientist, but not an actual war, interestingly enough. But all that to say, that's where I think we're at. But so the Trump team, to his credit, and I have some disagreements with President Trump over a number of things, but he was super pro-Israel and he was super pro-American in the sense that he understood Iran is not primarily the Israelis' problem. It's an American problem. It's a global problem. And he put enormous pressure on Iran, and Iran was almost bankrupt until Biden and Harris came in. And then, as you say, they tried to re-enter the nuclear agreement, and they started moving an enormous amount of money back to Iran, trying to get them to agree to a new deal. And now we see what a bankrupt policy that was. And I'm trying not to say that as a partisan. I know in a political season it feels like, but that's just the reality. Yeah. Just being a watchman on the wall, Ezekiel 33, you have to say there was an approach that was putting the Iranian regime in a bind and cutting off their financial oxygen supply. And what happened? Iran didn't attack America or Israel for 4 years. Yeah. And then that approach was changed. The oxygen supply was reopened, the financial oxygen. And what happened? The worst attacks in history from Iran against the United States and our ally, Israel. So that's where we are right now.
So we're talking about how world events tie into what the Bible predicts for the end days, the last days. And this is a subject that is confusing to some people, but it seems to me that it's not God's desire to conceal, but to reveal. I mean, the very word revelation means the unveiling. Right. And we read of Jesus saying, when he was talking about the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24, let the reader understand. Right. So it's like, you need to understand these things. Paul writes, brothers, I don't want you to be ignorant about these things. So we need to know about Bible prophecy, but you don't hear it discussed maybe in churches as much as you used to. Why do you think that is?
Well, for several reasons. One is a lot of pastors just don't believe it.
Wow.
Those who believe it some think the people who talk about Bible prophecy are weird. They
And
build
sometimes they are.
and sometimes they are. I mean, they're not wrong about that, some of them.
Yes.
And, the websites look like they were built in Area 51 in Roswell, New Mexico. It's all red and black, flames.
Yeah.
Every sentence is in capital letters
Yes.
with 97 exclamation points after it. And you're like, dude, seriously, have some decaf.
Yeah.
Really. And so people don't want to be identified. But look, you're a preacher of the gospel. You're an evangelist. The church isn't supposed to say, well, there's people preaching a false gospel or the prosperity gospel being the false gospel, among others. So I'm not going to preach the gospel because there are lunatics out there preaching false gospels.
Yeah.
You'd say, I need to do more to preach the gospel with clarity and conviction because people need to hear this. Same thing with the fact that 1 out of 4 verses in the entire Bible is prophecy. Now, half of them have already been fulfilled, which gives credibility to the second half.
Yeah.
And the second half, most of them lead us up to the second coming of Christ.
Right.
Some deal with after Christ returns. This is very important. If God thinks it's important for us to know, it's important for us to know.
Yeah.
But too much of the church either doesn't believe it or doesn't want to be identified with the prophecy nuts, or it's just a level of complication, or it feels political to them. Anyway, there are plenty of reasons not to do the right thing. The right thing is to teach it and help people understand what the Bible prophecies say and what they mean. Then it's a separate issue of, are we seeing those things come to pass right now? I would say it's too early, for example, to say Ezekiel 38 and 39 are in motion. Yes, Russia and Iran are building an alliance. We've never seen that in 2,500 years. So we keep an eye on it, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
I may change my view if there's more data a week or 10 days from now or whatever. Where we are, I believe, in terms of Bible prophecy is, number one, we mentioned, this is a birth pang.
Yeah.
This is exactly what Jesus talked about in Matthew 24, and we've seen several of them in recent years.
Yes.
We saw the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. That's the largest land war in the history of Europe since World War II. That's a birth pang.
Yeah.
We've seen the global pandemic, 6 million die through COVID. That's a birth pang.
Yes.
And I believe this war, the longest, deadliest, most brutal war of Israel has ever faced in the modern era, that's a birth pang. I wouldn't go further than that, except to say this. I do believe what we're watching is Amos 9:9. Okay. This is a prophecy where God says that in the last days, he says, I will shake the whole house of Israel among the nations. Now, Satan set into motion this demonic attack from 7 sides of Israel. This isn't God doing it, but it is God sovereignly letting it happen. Why would he sovereignly let it happen? I believe it's out of Amos 9:9, because Jews in Israel are sheep without a shepherd. Most of our Israeli brothers and sisters, they've forgotten that they even have a shepherd. They don't all believe that God is the shepherd, or that he cares for us, or that he will protect us. And the thing about forgetting that you have a shepherd, or rejecting the shepherd, or being angry at the shepherd, or whatever set of reasons that any individual has of not wanting to think of having a shepherd, the problem is that it's not a neutral countryside. There are ravenous wolves in the countryside, and that's what the Bible has explained to us from the beginning, and certainly to the end. And so if you're a sheep and you don't have a shepherd, and you decide, I don't want a shepherd, I don't need a shepherd, and you start wandering out, it's not like, it's not a neutral environment. So we got attacked by ravenous wolves. Now the question is Israel going to be shaken to the extent that they start looking more and more to God? Many Israelis are. We are finding that Israeli pastors that the Joshua Fund supports, encourages, prays for, we meet with, they are telling, especially in the north, near Lebanon, and south, near Gaza, that more people want to talk about God, the Bible, and even Yeshua, Jesus, than ever in their entire ministry lives. Now, in the center of the country, along the coast, where things are more secular and less impacted by the direct life and death situation, moment to moment. Yes, it's on television. Yes, it's on social media. But they're not personally affected. Then you see less of it. Those pastors are saying with you. I and my wife and my sons, we are having more conversations about Yeshua, about Jesus, about the gospel than any other time in the 37 years that I've been coming in and out of the country, or the 10 years since we became citizens. So God is shaking the country. I can't report, and I wish I could, but I can't report that we're seeing massive numbers of Israelis coming to faith in Jesus. but the seeds are being planted.
Yes.
And there are ears to hear that weren't listening even before. And I'll just add one more point. The Palestinians are being shaken.
Wow.
I believe we're seeing, I don't believe Israel's being judged. I believe we're being shaken. I do believe the Gazan Palestinians are being judged right now. When Genesis 12:3, if you bless the nation of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, forward, I will bless you, God says.
Yeah.
But if you curse them, I will curse you.
Yeah.
The Gazans, unfortunately, have cursed Israel for 76, 77 years straight, every single day. And there are consequences. That doesn't mean God doesn't love them or that the gospel shouldn't be preached to them, which should. But that doesn't mean that they can avoid the catastrophic judgments that they have incurred upon themselves.
So what should the Christian do in light of the fact that we're seeing birth pangs, we're seeing Bible prophecies fulfilled before our very eyes, reminders that Christ is returning? Jesus said, when you see these things begin to happen, look up, for your redemption is drawing near. Take away truth. Jesus could come at any moment, and we need to be ready to meet him. So how should a Christian live in light of the fact that these prophecies are being fulfilled right before their eyes?
Well, in a general sense, Greg, it should shake us in the church as well to walk more closely with Jesus, because as the Apostle John writes in 1 John, we don't want to be ashamed when we meet him in the air. We don't want, when we see him face to face, we don't want to be ashamed. So that means if you're living a life of spending time with someone or something, or reading something or whatever, that you would be ashamed of seeing Jesus the next second, then we need to repent. We need to clean up our lives and walk with Jesus in the power of the Spirit. Specifically when it comes to Israel, the Palestinians, the Lebanese, the Iranians, we got to remember that we're trying to fulfill the Great Commission. And in the midst of this horror show that Satan's involved in, God is moving. People are ready to hear how to go to heaven or not go to heaven, how to have their sins forgiven or not, where to find peace that passes all understanding. And this is our job, to make sure that everyone is at least heard, not to shove it down their throat, but people are listening because it's life and death right now. And the war could get much, much worse. So that's what the ministry of the Joshua Fund is. That's what all Israel News, all Arab News does, is I'll wrap up by saying, we encourage Christians to learn, pray, give, and go.
Good.
The more they learn about what's happening through this video and others, then they can be better prepared to pray. Pray actively and specifically for peace, but also for justice and for victory over these enemies and so forth. And pray for people's hearts to be open, to give financially to the Joshua Fund as an example of a ministry that this is what we do. 18 years, God has shockingly brought $100 million more now through the Joshua Fund to invest in the local church so they can be the hands and feet of Jesus in the local area. Learn, pray, give. I wouldn't say go right now. We will, you had a tour of almost 1,000 people that you had to, disband for now, postpone. We've done the same thing. But we brought evangelical leaders over. We've said there is a place for some evangelical leaders to come and see, to be witnesses of this horror show, to bring back information, but also to come and encourage Israeli hostage families and believers, unbelievers. So learn, pray, give, and go. I think that's a simple way to think about how should I respond. This is the darkest hour in Israel's modern history, but the light of Christ is so much brighter when the darkness is so dark, and people are listening and people are noticing, and we need to strengthen our local brothers and sisters. Again, not just Israelis, but the Palestinian church, the Lebanese church, the Iranian church, and everybody in that region, because God doesn't only love Israel. He doesn't only have a plan for us. He also has a plan for our neighbors and our enemies. And I'm grateful, and I can't wait to see the harvest that God is going to bring out of all this mess. But it shows you how hard our hearts are in the Middle East, that it would require a horror show like this to catch our attention.
Well, and I think go could be expanded just to all of us to go into all the world and preach the gospel.
Amen.
And the crisis coming, what should I do? Well, I want to tell as many people as possible. And so they'll be ready to meet him as well. So go into all of your world and preach the gospel. Joel, thank you for taking the time. I want to just say thank you for all that you do. You are a bold witness for Christ wherever you are, whether you're speaking in front of a crowd or speaking sometimes to world leaders or people of great influence. You always weave your story in, your amazing story of coming to Christ, and the role that you're playing right now with All Israel News and All Arab News and the Rosenberg Report. And then, of course, the last thing, Joel is a very gifted novelist. I first became familiar with Joel Rosenberg reading one of his novels. I thought, a Christian novel, no thank you. I'd rather read Tom Clancy. Then I read Joel Rosenberg and changed my tune.
That's how I felt about Christian movies until I watched the Jesus Revolution. I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody can do this.
Yes.
Wow. And Chosen to and others.
Really gripping stories. Sometimes, speaking of events before they happen, on more than one occasion, you've had scenarios in your books that actually played out in real time, capturing the attention of people like Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State. I read your books, Joel. So, Joel, there's a new book coming out called The Beijing Betrayal, and that'll be out in March 11th. March of 2025.
Right.
Yeah. So be looking for it, but Joel, thanks and God bless you.
Thank you. Thanks, brother.
Okay.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Harvest Plus. We're committed to providing you with content to encourage and help you grow in your walk with the Lord. Our vision is to use Harvest Plus to reach millions around the globe with the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ and to provide Christians with biblically centered media. This is a big vision, and it's only made possible by the generous support of people like you. Call us toll free at 800-821-3300 or go to harvest.org/donate and make a donation that will help us grow Harvest Plus and allow us to keep spreading the news of Jesus Christ to a world that desperately needs Him.